What's up guys, Dr. Quinn Hennick here with Just the Tip Tuesday. I'm going to do a little short Q&A. So we got a lot of Facebook questions and I'm just going to go down the line and address every single one in some capacity. So that may mean me saying that you need to go get checked out, or I'll reference videos, or I'll demonstrate some stuff. Tips for easing back into squatting and deadlifting following a lumbar injury. So I'm definitely going to start off saying that you should probably still make sure that you're good to go, actually have a healthcare professional see you, address any type of actual painful issues that you have. So having said that, obvious points to me right off the bat is rack pulls. So start pulling from above the knee to get used to weights again. Slowly over the course of a few weeks, progress to the knee, to mid-shin, and then finally from pulling from the floor. But if you start with pin pulls or rack pulls from above the knee, you can really focus on having a good position, and so we're not rounding or we're not overextending, but you can be super neutral and just focus on maintaining that position. You can play with some type of blocked sumo pull, where if our legs are a little bit wider and that bar is elevated up off of the ground, and you can just sit straight down, sometimes that can take pressure off of the lower back, so you can incorporate that, some type of sumo pull. And lastly, a trap bar. Albeit not the greatest of deadlift trainers, because a trap bar or a hex bar effectively becomes a squat for a lot of people, but you don't have to go around your knees because you're inside of the cage. And so you can simply focus again on that hinge and just regaining that pattern. And so a trap bar would be really good easing back into a deadlift. For squats, this is going to be kind of specific to everyone. You can decrease the range of motion by putting a box behind you, but I find that your back is going to hurt when you squat, it's going to hurt if you're squatting to a box or if you're squatting all the way down. And so I wouldn't say a box is the go-to thing. I would say whichever one feels better, either front squat or back squat, stick with that for your first mesocycle or your first month of training, and then start to incorporate the other variation back in. A safety bar squat can be the intermediate between a front squat and a back squat, whereas that weight is still kind of counterbalanced a little bit even or slightly in front, and so you can really just focus on sitting straight down. Another great tool to ease back into squatting is the goblet squat, not to gain any type of strength, but just to regain the ability to squat. So if I have this kettlebell and I'm just sitting straight down, it's just a nice counterbalance for me, and I can work on that squat. So that can be a good warm-up, easing back in. Next is hip impingement. And we got 3 or 4 of those. We've talked about this in the past. 9 times out of 10, barring any type of actual structural injury, if we're getting pinching in the front of our hips when it's flexing, that's a malpositioned joint. So that's a mechanics issue. That's a position issue. For those of you having this problem, I want you to try something. I want you to try to arch your lower back, okay? Dump your pelvis forward, overextend, and then squat down. Okay, monitor what your symptoms feel like. They probably got worse. And then I want you to dump your pelvis backwards or posteriorly tilt. You're going to round your lower back and then squat again. Your symptoms probably got better, except we're not going to squat with heavy weight like this, right? And so again, we can go back to using a kettlebell and playing with certain positions. And so with this counterbalance, I can work on not being totally overextended, but just that neutral tilt. So I still have a lordosis here, but it's not excessive. And then I maintain that as I sit straight down, okay? And you may find that you get less pinching. The quadruped position is also very good for this. So if I'm on all fours, here I can rock back, or I can play with pelvic tilt, either posteriorly or anteriorly, and I can play with foot and knee position, where I can rock back, and alter my position to either increase my symptoms, which you then know that I'm going to go away from that position, or decrease your symptoms, and then you reinforce and practice whatever position decreases your symptoms. So we've got a lot of videos. If you just go on YouTube and search Quinn Hennick butt wink, or Quinn Hennick hip, or Darkside Strength butt wink, Darkside Strength hip, we've written articles. So on Google, search Quinn Hennick butt wink, all that stuff. It should pop up with a lot of videos and articles, a lot of information that you can use on hip impingement. TFL, which is the muscle here, it's one of the hip flexors. and aids in a little bit of internal rotation, TFL and hip internal rotation. So I'm not sure what the question is there. It's more of a statement, but I'm assuming perhaps the TFL, he's feeling symptoms and he lacks the ability to internally rotate. And so one way that we can get hip internal rotation is just with our 90-90 position, okay? So head, we can do our hip lift, and this is a drill that's kind of derived from the PRI. If you pull down the wall with your hamstrings and lift that tailbone, and we can play with moving the feet out to the side. And so we've posteriorly tilted the tailbone, we've lifted the hips, and so that's going to clear a little bit of space in the front to allow you to be able to rotate a little bit more, okay? And so we can breathe in this position. We can move closer to the wall, and you can have a roller or something between the knees to set your hips, but we can move closer to the wall to increase the amount of flexion that we can tolerate with internal rotation. Ed can also lay on his side. Same thing, we can bring this foot higher than the knee, and then we can work on shifting the hips back and forth just like that. We want to maintain the breathing pattern, use the exhale to set a position, and the whole entire goal is just to clear a little bit of space in the front while we bias a little bit of hip internal rotation. Then we can move to quadruped. So we're on all fours, or actually 6 points of contact in this case, but we can play with pelvic tilt, as we said before. And so if we dump the pelvis backwards, that's going to clear a little bit of space in the front of the hip from which to gain more internal rotation. And so we can dump the pelvis backwards and then move the feet a little wider, which is going to internally rotate the hips. And then we can work on dumping the pelvis back forward or anteriorly to gain a little bit of space. So we can go back and forth with that pelvic tilt and play with knees wider, knees narrow, feet wider to bias different types of rotation. Okay, so hopefully that helps you in terms of hip internal rotation. That can also, again, help with the impingement that we were talking about earlier. Psoas and internal rotation. Again, I'm not sure what the question is, but I'm assuming it's very, very similar. So either our psoas is kind of locked up, or people continuously feel tightness here in the hip flexors. And sometimes we need to use the hip flexors. So Ed, lay on your back again. The hip flexor march is a good one for this. So I want you to put this, feet up in the air. Good. You're going to keep one hip flexed past 90 degrees, and you're going to kick the other foot straight out, closer to the ground. Good. And so he's using the hip flexor on this side, come back up, but he's resisting that urge to hyperextend as he kicks out. So he's going to exhale and kick one leg out. And so he keeps those ribs down, and he stays tied together through his trunk, but he's going to use his hip flexors on one side. And again, keeping this hip up above 90. And that can actually be a way, get more, a way to inhibit excessive hip flexor tone, because you're stabilizing the position that they should actually be working from, if that makes sense. And you can do sets of 10 total reps here. The focus is position, keeping those ribs down and keep everything stable and flush. Thanks, Ed. Get out of here. Go play in traffic. Pulling belly button in versus ribs down. Said had a PT tell me belly button in is better for engaging deep abs and stabilizers. So there were some studies earlier years back that if you draw in, essentially making yourself skinny or pulling your belly button into your spine, that it preferentially facilitates the transverse abdominis and the multifidi, that are some of the smaller spinal erectors or spinal stabilizers in your back. And that's true, like EMG studies will show you that drawing in will help activate your TA. But Charlie Weingroff says that EMG studies, they don't lie, but they don't tell the whole story. And in this case, I think that's very, very true. Your core, your abdominals are made to work in unison. They're made to work together as kind of a corset or a brace. The whole is much, much more than the sum of its parts. And so if you're trying to stabilize one muscle of the core, you're kind of missing the benefit. And so we don't it's not necessarily about ribs being down, and so because this is not necessarily a position that we're going to be able to do everything performance-wise either, but it's more of an exhale sets a position. It reflexively stabilizes or activates pretty much all the muscles of the core, and then when we breathe in, we want to expand that position 360 degrees, and that's much, much different than trying to draw your belly button in and make yourself skinny. Essentially, by doing that, you're denting your own can. You're making yourself skinnier and less pressurized and inherently weaker. So drawing in is not what we want to do. Improving shoulder internal rotation, that goes back to the hip impingement thing. So Ed, one more time, on your back, 90-90. Pop your ribs up, Ed. So Ed's got this super, and we see this, with lifting, we want to arch, right? And then, so this rib cage is super extended here, and that's okay. Let this arm bend. So if I test his internal rotation, he doesn't have much there. And the end feel is kind of that bony block. And so I can't actually stretch through that. That's a positional thing. So if you feel that boom, 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 we've got a fixed position from the platform up. The platform being the rib cage is the foundation for the shoulder. So don't just go cranking on your shoulder joint. So I'm going to have Ed put his hands on his lower ribs. He's going to breathe in. He's going to exhale through his mouth. And he's going to kind of get these guys to go down just a little bit, right? You don't have to be completely flat to the floor. We're just changing position a touch. And then let this arm relax. Good. And so we gain different range there. It's the different end feel. There's more movement. Okay, pop your ribs up again. If I stabilize, and that's just completely different. I just hit a block at that point. I can't go any further. Exhale again. So we change position. And that shit, again, it just gives him, he changes his rib cage position and all of a sudden gives him shoulder range of motion. Now, so what you can do is this very, very simple exercise is that arm up towards the ceiling. Breathe in through your nose. Exhale all the way, all the way, all the way, all the way. And just let that arm kind of passively, almost passively, reach up to the ceiling. And you're clearing space into that shoulder girdle. And then from here, you can just move through range. You can be here. You can work on being here, or you can bend that elbow, and then you can work on moving through internal rotation, external rotation, but the whole focus is the rib cage position. Okay, squatting, breathing cues and techniques. We've kind of talked about the breathing cues. We've also got a question of submaximal breathing or submaximal lifts for the squat and deadlift. What the breathing is, or the breathing pattern is compared to your maximal lifts. I don't necessarily think the pattern changes at all. I think the intensity changes. And so if I'm going to deadlift 65%, I'm still going to I'm probably still going to exhale a little bit and set a position, and then put air, breathe into my nose and put air into that position and do my lift. I'm just not going to brace and breathe in as with the same intensity. The pattern is the same. As far as breathing and bracing for the squat and deadlift, what I'll do is before I take the bar, say this is my squat rack, before I take the bar, I'll exhale a little bit to set a position, and then I'll put some air into that space to reinforce that position, and from that point, I get under the bar. And once the bar is on my back or in my front rack, this has already been established. I'm not trying to regain a new position once I'm under the bar. I think that's a mistake that people make. So I would set, before the bar is even on your back, I would exhale and set position with our abs, and I would breathe in to that space. Then put the bar on your back, shallow breathing, and then from there it's breathe in and lift your heavy weight. So the rules of lifting heavy weights don't necessarily change. At the very end of the day, you still want to put as much air in and pressurize as possible. With the deadlift, it's kind of the same thing. I see a lot of people have success with over top of the bar, exhaling, and then breathing in a little bit into that new position before they reach down for their final breath in and pull. For something like the snatch or the clean, it's a little bit different in that the weight is not as heavy, and so you shouldn't be as rigid, and so you can actually get down here and breathe in and pull the slack from the bottom up, as opposed to trying to go super tight from the top down. So that's just something you can kind of play with. And we've talked about that a lot in the breathing and bracing workshops that we do. Okay, I have a huge problem with trap dominance. I have chronic shoulder pain in my left shoulder due to my inability to keep my shoulders down and back. What exercises can I do to help, or what can I do to strengthen and alleviate the pain? So I don't treat pain on the internet. I would recommend that you definitely go see somebody in person. However, the cue of down and back can be a little bit misled, because if we're always packing our shoulders down, that's not necessarily where we want to be. If we're going over our head or reaching for things in any capacity, your shoulder blades absolutely have to move, okay? So we don't necessarily want to demonize upper trap movement. We just want to couple it with the other muscles that assist in shoulder blade rotation. The serratus, the upper trap, you want to make sure the ribs are in a good position. So if you're talking about standing posture, this is not sustainable and is actually just as bad as this. It just can lead to different problems, okay? So all you need to do is think about standing tall, like if somebody's pulling a string from the top of your head, and just give me a quick exhale. And that's going to pretty much set you where you need to be. And from there, you can just kind of put your shoulders on a little shelf. They can be pretty loose. I'm not packing my shoulders down and back and throwing my ribs forward. I'm just letting them rest. And that could be a way to reduce some of that upper trap tone. As far as going overhead, how much trap we need upper trap to assist in upward rotation, right? And so a way that we can figure that out is if you stand, I want you guys to reach forward a little bit, okay, with your shoulder blades, just slightly, and maintain that reach as you go over your head. And that should give you just about the right amount of upper trap. A lot of people don't benefit from a super high shrug at the very top. It kind of actually makes them more unstable. But you don't want to be down and back when you're overhead, because that keeps your shoulder blades from moving. And so a slight reach and then up. And that should give you the amount of upper trap that you need. And lastly, why does my Darkside tee make me look more jacked than my other t-shirts? That's probably because the Darkside tee is the most badass motherfucking shirt you're ever going to have. And that's just a tip.